Hi folks, Casual Dad here with a quick guide. I wanted to take a quick break from the faction breakdowns to talk about kind of prepping for a new ladder season. It's a little bit late because we're about a week into the current season, well, just a little bit less. But I did want to take the time to go ahead and talk through kind of my process and what I would recommend for other players who want to kind of level up their game a bit. So first thing you want to do is click on your trophy count right here. You want to look at your whole faction breakdown, and then just to rehash it, your total ladder rank is going to be based on the overall trophy count of your top 4 factions. And again, that's factions, not warlords. So you could mix up as many different, say, Chaos warlords as you want. They're going to contribute to your overall total trophy count for that one faction. And so, just kind of talking through this, if you want to get to Terra, that's not super challenging. And I shouldn't say that. For new players, that is definitely a hill to climb. But what you want to do is focus on kind of your 4 strongest factions, especially as you start out. This is a game that can take a lot of time to kind of get competitive with. And even for veteran players, there's still a big time commitment to getting high up in any individual season. So right at the beginning, you want to look at kind of your trophy counts and see which 4 you want to level up. Now, I enjoy mixing it up a little bit. So last season, I did Servants of the Emperor, Chaos, Tyranids, and Eldari. You can already see I've gone ahead and got Orcs back in there for my current rotation. And then next season, I actually kind of want to try Leagues Votann and see how high I can get with them. But you can also see that at the beginning of a season, your trophy count resets, and so you have to climb the ladder back again. And so in terms of time commitment, it's just not reasonable to do more than say 4 factions. If you really want to climb and want to progress higher in the ladder than you have before, one of the ways that I personally recommend doing that is picking 5 factions instead of just 4. That way, you get your top 4 to the highest kind of trophy count you expect to get, then play your 5th, and see if it can beat one of your top 4. When it does, then rotate and switch, so you're always playing whichever one is just outside of your top 4, so you can kind of creep up a little bit without suffering major losses. As long as you're only playing the faction that's not in your top 4, that will cushion you from taking any losses while still giving you some room to progress a little bit higher. That's a nice way if you're just at the edge of the competitive tier you want to be at. It is a bigger time commitment, playing 5 factions instead of 4, but that's a really safe way to progress. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to show my top 4 decks, the ones that I do expect to progress this season, and then I'm going to play 1 game with each. So we'll go in reverse order. I'm actually going to start with Eldari. My best deck for Eldari is going to be Lilith. And now she's just so good. And to kind of talk about this a little bit, this is off meta. Usually in a Lilith deck, it's a mix of psychic, melee, and ranged. But with her ability to redeploy cards after they kill an enemy card, it really works with pretty much any ability. And while I was using what's kind of generally referred to as the Flying Circus, where you have a bunch of cards. It's called Flying Circus because you have a bunch of flyers that hit hard, but then you also have a bunch of Harlequins in there, so it ends up with kind of a carnival feel to it. I've switched to going all really hard ranged because what I found was that with the mixed deck, I just didn't have the same level of offensive punch that I was hoping for. So the deck was a little bit more durable. I had the Shield Harlequin, I had the Solitaire in there. It was more durable, but it struggled to punch through the tougher decks in time. And this is actually a great example where Logan can be really tough to deal with. And this is going to be an absolute mess. I'm probably going to wreck this guy. So like Logan and some of the other melee decks could really quickly give you some attrition. You don't want to hit them in melee. And because of that, it could be really tough to progress. And I was taking a lot of losses, a lot more than I expected with my kind of mixed melee. So I'm going all ranged and hitting really hard some of the big players to see if that works a little bit better. Last season, I also tried a pure melee, and that also was fairly effective, but there are definitely some decks and warlords that you just do not want to see at that point. And I was hitting a lot of those. So the all-ranged Lilith has been more effective for me. I'm going to see kind of where it ends up in the top tier here. I may also mix in some other Eldari warlords as well, just to try it out. The Avatar performed really well for me last season, and I think he's still in a really good spot with the levels I've got, and then also just kind of with the meta you've got going being very heavily ranged, but with the Avatar being able to out-melee a ranged deck, but then also being able to stack up favorably with an opposing melee deck as well. And I talk a lot about this, but also when you are in the competitive ladder, The easiest time to progress is going to be the first week. Most players haven't played that much. You're going to hit this huge pool of players who are kind of just starting out and don't have very highly rated decks, so you're going to get a lot of favorable matchups. It also is a little bit slower. Because you're going to get favorable matchups, every win is likely to only give you 45 trophies. Whereas if you're laddering at a slightly more competitive time, you could get some wins that'll give you 60 to 80 trophies, which will get you a much faster progression. And that's what you're going to see a lot more in week 2 and then into week 3. The final week of the season, I've talked about this before, and especially the final weekend, if you saw my last video, is an extremely difficult time to ladder because chances are you're going to hit a lot of very, very powerful decks that are supposedly favorable matchups, but if they beat you, you take a major hit in trophies. So I recommend, if you're really wanting to progress a lot in this, hit the season ladder really, really hard with your 4 factions in the first... and let's just take a look at what's next. So I did Eldar, we'll go ahead and do Tyranids next. Hit it in the first 2 weeks, really hard. And then you can punch it a little bit in the 3rd week, and then if you have a 5th faction, you can kind of play around with that in your week 4. Now, second up is going to be Tyranids. Now, my best performing Tyranid last season was, of course, the Swarmlord. Just to show this, Pure Psychic Swarmlord, really good at finishing out fights, very durable. These Psychers are all high enough level where they put out crazy amounts of damage, and even though they do die fairly quickly, they trade well. So they will take out more cards than they... take out cards more quickly than they die, clearing the way for the Swarmlord to finish up the game. And with his Inspire, he actually punches endgame much better than he used to. So that's been a very effective deck. I also want to try to get the Turvagon to work. I'm still experimenting with decks, and I'll play with that a little bit more. Found that to be tricky because the Turvagon is not a good endgame piece, and that's where a lot of Warlords are really struggling now in the current meta, where before they did a little bit better. But I'm going to try that one. You can see it's also kind of Pure Psychic with her free Termagant in there just to kind of clear out injured cards and kind of clog up lanes. Haven't played it much, but not sure how it's really going to perform. I've done some games with the Swarmlord, but the one I really want to try to ladder and see where it peaks is the Parasite. And I've talked a little bit about the Parasite before. I'm going to go ahead and play this one. The key is just to hit really, really, really hard so that you get the most benefit out of your ability, so you're applying the Infect stacks, which cut your damage in half. But also so you're quickly getting some value out of the kills. Ooh, this is going to be an interesting game. Small deck, so that's really good and bad. It's good because it means that I'm probably going to get a lot of benefit out of my explosions for the cards that kill. It's bad because it means that the cards that I'm up against are probably going to be difficult to kill. So just to restate it, with the Parasite, the first time the Parasite does a melee attack against an opponent, and that's maybe not the best start, I didn't have a great draw. The first time the Parasite hits a card in melee, that attack deals half damage, but the target becomes infested. And if that card is subsequently killed, it deals 40% of its base wounds as damage to adjacent cards. A couple cool things about that. That damage goes through shields. So if you're dealing with a lot of shielded cards, if you set up some really beefy bodyguards in the lanes beside them and kill those, you can actually kill a card under its shields, which is fantastic. The other thing too is it's kind of like a melee barrage, where you're doing damage to adjacent cards. And that's a place where a lot of melee decks can really struggle, is they don't have a way, and you saw that explosion do some extra damage to that guy there. Melee cards don't have a way to deal with adjacent enemies except Death Blow, but the Parasite helps with that because, ooh, that's going to be great. I'm just looking, that thing has a ton of hit points, and I just pulled Abaddon himself, so even though this is pretty scary, I'm looking at an infected Spike Claw that has very low hit points. So that's kind of a key thing here too. With the... Okay, so let's see if I want to set this up so I don't die outright, but let's do it. With the Parasite's ability, you kind of want to stagger these. The last thing you want is a board wipe. You don't want to kill every card on there because then their explosion is wasted. So you kind of want to stagger it. You want some weak, and I'm just going to finish this guy off. This is going to be great. Perfect. So you want to stagger it. So if you get a board wipe, then the last card you kill is blowing up on nothing. So you're kind of wasting that infect damage you set up. So ideally, you want to kind of knock out some squishy cards and clear and weaken some of the big beefy cards so that when another card deploys, you get the maximum benefit out of that card's explosion. So I'm kind of learning about the strategy of the Parasite. I think it's going to be a really, really interesting deck to level. The biggest challenge is going to be that the Parasite itself, mine is only level 5. I just got that. That's going to be a big weak point in the deck. So I really need to get a lot of mileage out of the other cards in the deck. I do think that target acquired is really important. Taunt is really important to keep your key cards alive. But the kind of absolute basic pieces in here, you've got your Spore, which it does some melee damage, but also when it dies, that Death Blow applies that infect ability to every card on the board, which is awesome. You throw that sucker in the middle, get some additional infects without losing your melee punch on some of your hits. Another one is the Death Leaper. Both has Outflank to give you the melee buff and a debuff to your opponent, and has that Furious Charge that does some measurable damage even if you only get half of it, but also applies that infect when it drops. So you hit, you apply your infect, you get the melee buff, and then you hit again for over 100 damage. That can really quickly set up those explosions in a very effective way for you. And then, of course, the Moloch itself, completely insane melee damage. Even if that's doing half damage, I do not care, because it does plenty. And once a card is infected, this will quickly finish it off to trigger your explosions, and again, trade favorably. So I've settled on this deck. Oh, last piece. You may notice I've also got several poison cards in here. Once the card is infected, it doesn't matter how it dies. If it dies to poison, or somehow kills itself, that still will trigger the explosion if it was infected previously. So that's why I've got those poison guys in there, because they can help set that up. They hit a card, they infect it, and then it does significant extra damage because of poison, so that sets up the ability really nicely. Pretty excited to see where this goes. I do think the Parasite is underrated, and I've been really enjoying experimenting with it. Let's see, so we did Eldari, we did Tyranids. Let's go ahead and do Orcs next. Got 2 decks I'm playing with in Orcs. I'm going to go ahead and show the one I haven't shown before, I don't think. That's going to be Zagstruck. He's been in a bit of a funny melee position, or in a meta position, excuse me, because he doesn't do a terrific job one-on-one with a lot of Warlords. If he goes up against a really punchy Warlord, he can really struggle, even with his double damage. That's a bad matchup. Advantage on this one is it's a relatively low-rated one, and it's a small deck, so I should be able to leverage my additional attacks here to really mess this up. Awesome. We're going to go ahead and throw in Taunt. Kind of the key, biggest gain that Zagstruck has gotten in the past couple seasons is this guy. So we've talked about this before. Zagstruck's ability is whenever a card readies, it attacks for its full melee value. So 84, he'll hit for 84 whenever he readies, and he readies when you play him, and then also has Furious Charge. So he hits Furious Charge. Even rank 1 is, I think, 34. We'll see that in a second. Oh, that was a mistake. But then, so this guy is already basically dead, and he just deployed it, and that was... So this guy attacked 3 times. So he hit once with his... what are we going to do? We're going to hit 70. Not enough. We'll do this. So he hit once with his Furious Charge for about 34. Hit again for his full melee value. Even with the fear debuff, it was still pretty significant. And then did his full attack when I did the psychic attack. Now, that, I was lucky there. That really highlighted one of the biggest weaknesses of Zagstruck is you want to use your ability, you want to use psychic, so that your cards attack without being hit back. Now, that only works if your opponent is not using psychic. But this is actually a case where I'm going to kill this guy and this guy. Greyfax's psychic attack, this is a low-level Greyfax, so I'm not really worried about that, so I'm going to do it anyway. Against a deck that has no psychic, that would be my entire board attacking and taking no hits back. That's the real advantage of Zagstruck, is you have all those attacks on deploy and can also hit hard in melee without taking damage back. So this was a pretty easy matchup. That could have been a really scary one had that been a higher level Greyfax. So I got a little bit lucky there, but it is week 1 still, and so I expect most matches to be very favorable and my level progression to go very quickly. So that's what we did. One more game. Want to keep this video relatively short, and then I'll kind of restate some of the points I made, and we'll go from there. Now, next up I have Chaos. Chaos I've been kind of tinkering with. I have been surprised that my most successful Warlord was Abaddon. I'm just going to show that deck. I've got a couple heavy melee hitters with melee and fear leveled up to the point where they're very effective. Abaddon's kind of a weird deck. You want your cards to do a lot of damage, but you also want them to die at a decent clip so that your you can pull Abaddon earlier than later and really benefit from his ability, because he's a terrific endgame finisher against both enemy warlords and bodyguards. So he's great. And I've been really enjoying that. And he does stack up very well against some of the punchier enemy warlords. And the big shooting ones, he's able to take out the warlord before heavy shooting bodyguards can take him down. So he's been really effective. The other one that I like a lot is Skulltaker. I do think quite possibly, and I'm going to do a faction breakdown for Chaos at some point, I think quite possibly the best Chaos Warlord is going to be Huron. If I see a really high level Huron, I expect to lose that match. Especially with that Keeper of Secrets, with his ability to steal attacks from opposing cards, and having just extremely durable decks that rack up really, really scary attack values without really taking any losses. He is terrifying at high level, and this is actually a deck that I stole from another player who just wiped the floor with me last season. Another one I want to see played more is Ahriman. Him gaining the what is this? Warp Surge trait, so that he actually does attack on drop, really, really helps his endgame damage. Lets him finish off an injured card and maybe take out a lane in the endgame, but then also just stacks up his damage dramatically. So that's actually completely changes his profile, where he's not someone who drops and then has to wait for his turn. He has some offensive punch right when he drops, which is far more aggressive than he's been before, and he does seem a little bit more effective. Also gaining the regen trait on the turkey is nice too. But I'm going to go ahead and play that Abaddon deck because it's fast and it's been one of my more effective ones. But yeah, Chaos I'm still playing with. It was one of my high-performing factions last season. But we'll see how it goes. Okay, against Rakarth. Now I talked about you want to trade up with your Abaddon deck. If this guy's a powerful Rakarth, I may be in real trouble. It's really going to depend on card levels. So far, I should be just fine because those are very low level. Like I said, you do want to trade up. You want to get kills. Yeah, let's do that. You want to get kills at a decent clip, but also lose some of your cards at a decent clip so you can play Abaddon and really benefit from his ability and finish the game. Because if he's on the board a little bit before the opposing warlord, you have time to really ramp up the attack value of your cards, especially if he's not your last card to drop. So that he can then beef up the damage of cards in your deck before you even play them, so they can come into play really, really aggressive. Now, why I mention that here is that that's a bad matchup with Rakarth because he's an attrition deck. Because each death of any card, no matter who is controlling it, means that... Let's see, no, I don't have enough. Oh, I do have enough there. Means that as cards die on both sides, his cards get more durable, and it just takes a long time to clear them. So it can make it challenging to do that beneficial trade I was talking about, because it just takes so long to slog through those cards. Should be just fine here. Again, just because of that card level, he's just not particularly threatening here, but you never know when that'll change. Let's see, Rakarth himself is level 2. Okay. And this is exactly the kind of matchup you should expect in the first week. You're going to go up against a lot of players who, they're not doing anything wrong. This is a fine Rakarth deck. I imagine he's doing well with it. But it's not the same level as the stuff that I'm running, just because I've been playing for a while. Let's go ahead and give you a little bit of a break. And now you are going to see taunt cards in Abaddon decks. You're probably going to see the taunt cards played quite early. When human players play Abaddon, it's going to be... they'll probably hold those back to protect some of your late game cards. I tend to play them somewhat early to protect my bruisers, so I can clear some early cards and kind of clear the way for Abaddon. And then also taunt cards, you lose them fairly quickly, so that's a nice way to clear the way for Abaddon himself to come out of your deck and be deployed. This is one of those things. This guy here, you really need to devote some damage to take out that 5-point Banshee, otherwise it'll just keep recharging health even as you're hitting it. Even here, I've got that melee debuff. Okay, I'll take it down. Well, maybe. Yeah, I'll kill it here because I'm not going to give it any other healing. But then it'll heal the other two. This is a slightly slower game than I was hoping for, but one of the things that's kind of fun about playing Abaddon, is he's very aggressive. So you tend to have faster games that are pretty satisfying. Even if you lose, whether you win or lose, they're going to be quicker games than most other warlords, which is something that's appealing about the hard-hitting melee decks. Both Abaddon and the Avatar fall in that category. Oh, this is going to be great. So still 3 cards in deck. Let's play the man himself. A note on your target acquired cards. If it's a close game, you want to play your target acquired cards as soon as possible. You may not get exactly what you want to hit with. Oh, that was not a good idea. But if you keep them in your deck, then you're about to get that lethal hit on an enemy warlord. Then you have to drop a target acquired, and if they have 2 bodyguards on the board, you have no choice but to hit a bodyguard with target acquired. So suddenly, instead of hitting face or hitting the enemy warlord, you're quote-unquote wasting attacks on a bodyguard instead, which can cost you the game. So you do not want to end a game with target acquired in your deck if it's a close game. So I should have played that sooner, but that wasn't a close game. So that was some week 1 matchups. Just talking again about that strategy, pick your top 4 factions early. You want to go ahead and devote the time to playing those, because you don't want to spend time playing all of your factions. The one exception to that is if you're just trying to get your quests. Then just play whatever warlord you can do to get the progression to level up, get some free cards. That's the way to go. If you are aggressively laddering, pick just 4, settle on those. If you really, really, really want to push your boundaries and devote a lot of time into getting higher than you have before, pick your top 5. And again, rotate out your bottom 5th, or your 5th faction. Always play the one that's out of your top 4, so you always have potential to win more trophies, but will never lose more than you already have. But yeah, hope that was useful. I'll get back to the faction guides tonight. And yeah, happy gaming.